Get this, adults with financial literacy skills have 82% more wealth than those who don't. From swimming lessons to piano classes, us parents invest in so many things to enrich our kids' lives. But are we investing in their future financial success? With Greenlight, you can teach your kids financial literacy skills like earning, saving, and investing. And this investment costs less than that after-school treat. Start prioritizing their financial education and future today with a risk-free trial at greenlight.com/Wondery. Greenlight.com/Wondery.
I was struggling for the past year and a half, 2 years with trying to lose weight.
I just can't get rid of the stubborn weight in my legs and in my belly.
While everyone is unique and will have varied results, here are extraordinary experiences from independent body affiliates and actual Belvital users.
There's nothing more frustrating than knowing that you're eating well, but it's not working.
Hormone imbalances were preventing these women from losing weight. Now there's a comprehensive plan to help.
With Belvital, I just noticed changes immediately. That stubborn scale finally moved.
In this first week, I lost 5 pounds.
Just after 1 week, I'm down 6 pounds and all of my bloating is gone.
I just finished the Belvital program. I have lost 15 pounds and I have never felt better.
I've noticed inches just shed every week that I go through.
I've lost 13 pounds and 16 inches from all around my body.
I feel like an entirely different person.
I don't know if I've ever felt this good.
Get hormone health for women at belvital.com. This will change everything.
Today, the beverage aisle looks a lot different than it used to. America's beverage companies are working together. We're delivering the options everyone wants. In fact, nearly 60% of beverages Americans buy have 0 sugar. You'll find more variety than ever, including more of your favorites, now available with 0 sugar. You'll also find more sizes and clear calorie information on the front of every can, bottle, and pack. We know when it comes to finding balance, the more choices, the better.
I would tell them that they are not alone. There is people who love them, whether it be family or friends, and that if you know someone you know is going through any domestic violence, that there's help and there's people that care about you, and it's time for survivors to step up and speak out about domestic violence.
That's Teri Lyn Prestegard, a friend of Sabrina Schnoor. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. Sabrina Schnoor was born in 1998 in Mankato, Minnesota. She attended the local school district and graduated from Owatonna High School. She was the kind of girl and young woman who enjoyed camping, all sorts of music, being in nature, and fishing with her grandfather. Sabrina's family said she was obsessed with animals of all kinds and loved walking her dog more than most. Sabrina had a young son named Daniel, who had become the center of her life by the time she was 25 years old. Her friends described her as a loving mom who cherished her time with her son and said that Sabrina was altruistic, artistic, and creative, and had a joyful, goofy spirit that reminded them as much of a child as it did an adult. They described her as the type of person who was always willing to see the best in people, finding the one good thing that others would overlook. They said she was caring and someone who was hard to forget once you had met her. But underneath it all, Sabrina was carrying a secret, they said, known only to a handful of people. She was in a relationship with a 38-year-old man named Jason Lee Horner that was marred by domestic violence. People say that it takes an average of 7 times to get out of a relationship that involves domestic violence, and Sabrina was ready, having recently separated from Horner in a more permanent way than before. But advocates also warn that there's no period in a domestic relationship that involves violence that's more dangerous than the moment when the abused person is trying to leave. Sabrina had mentioned to friends that she thought she needed to get a gun to protect herself because Horner had bought one. He had threatened to kill her, she told them, once before. Despite her friends advising her not to, Sabrina agreed to meet Horner one more time, as her friends said, to help him get closure. On May 29, Sabrina's body was found. Her skull was fractured, and she had had a gunshot wound to the head. Law enforcement believed that the long gun had been placed in her mouth and fired once. Her body was near a set of railroad tracks that had a walking path along it. The police quickly homed in on Horner and arrested him, but Sabrina's death has left deep scars on her family, her friends, and her community. Sabrina's mother has created the Sabrina Lee Foundation, which is dedicated to attempting to prevent domestic violence. Sabrina's family and friends said that she did not have to die that way, that if police and prosecutors had done their jobs right in the past and taken Horner, a serial abuser, off the streets, he would have not had the chance to kill Sabrina and leave her son orphaned. Horner had been arrested and charged with multiple domestic violence incidents, which all resulted in plea deals with light sentences. After her death, Sabrina's mother said, "I promise my daughter I will make changes in this broken system, and I will do all I can to keep this from happening to another girl." Advocates often say that long before victims of domestic violence are comfortable going to their families, they often turn to their friends and even at times acquaintances that they know less well. Today, I'm joined by Teri Lyn Prestegard, a friend of Sabrina's, to discuss Sabrina's life and death, the impact, domestic violence, and the things that friends can do when the people they care about are facing some kind of domestic abuse. Hey, Teri Lyn, I just wanted to thank you for coming and joining me. It was a real pleasure to meet you in December when we were all in Minnesota and we had those great opportunities to have really cool conversations about, some of the real issues. I always joke to people that like true crime as entertainment as a gateway drug to actually helping. And it was just neat to meet you, neat to meet your friend, neat to hear Sabrina's story, and also to hear from so many people who are dedicated to do something about it. But I just really, I appreciated your willingness to be so open and vulnerable about the situation and how you felt about it as a friend. So I'm really grateful that you would come on to even talk about this. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. Yeah, I really didn't get into advocating for victims and survivors until after I got into true crime and I had my own trauma I had to deal with. So it's been a whirlwind.
Yeah, I know. I wonder sometimes whether, people ask me sometimes why do people gravitate toward true crime? And I think there are all sorts of different reasons. There are people who like mysteries and like to solve puzzles. But I find that for a lot of people, it's deeply connected to either their own anxieties or their own trauma or some combination of those, along with some desire to solve things. Is
Yes.
that sort of like the way that it played out for you?
Yeah. I agree with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So, back when we were in Minneapolis, one of the really cool things was we had the opportunity to hear from Jem Schmidt, who is Gabby Petito's dad. And there were like a bunch of different things that all came together like in a moment there, which just screamed to me that we need to have a broader conversation about domestic violence. Jim brought up Gabby's situation, and he really spoke a lot about domestic violence awareness, some of the difficulties of dealing with intimate partner abuse, the related trauma, and he gave great advice on like what friends could do. And I remember thinking to myself as he was talking, that's not we often talk about like families and other people in someone's life, but we rarely talk about like either the impact on friends and what they could do. And then the second odd thing, right, or I guess the thing that came in was I had just gotten a message from a friend of mine, like, I don't know, a little more than an hour before, where she had told me that her boyfriend had physically assaulted her. And later I would find out that he had actually choked her, pinned her against the wall, held her down on the couch, and was about to hit her. And, in the weeks afterwards, it was really, really difficult for her to make a decision about what to do. But interestingly, Jim gave me and then her through me a bunch of resources, and it looks like she's walked away. So we had that literally happening. And then, I ended up talking to you about Sabrina's story, and I felt like all the stars were aligning to have a conversation about domestic violence, which is one, I think, and intimate partner abuse and its impacts. And I also think at the same time, it all brought all three of us in the room together to have the conversation. It's something we don't talk about a lot. So I was just, wondering what was that experience like for you as one of Sabrina's friends during that period of time where she was being abused?
Well, me and Sabrina, we were teenagers when we first met. And of course, we were headstrong teenagers. We always said, that'll never happen to me, or I'd never let a guy hit me. And it wasn't until after I had my own domestic violence relationship happen to me that I realized domestic violence can be all sorts of things. And later I found out that Sabrina was going through domestic violence relationship. She had a domestic violence relationship. And it was after I had moved away. I had moved 45 minutes away from the town that we lived in. So we kind of grew apart a little bit, but I was still there for her, and she still talked to me a lot, and I knew what was going on, but it was hard to help her when at the time I didn't know how to help myself. So,
Right.
yeah. And yeah, we would text every so often, and I would always tell her, like, you need to leave, and it wasn't until after my relationship that I had learned that it's just not that easy.
Right. You said something that I thought was really interesting just a second ago. You said that after your situation, you realized that domestic violence happens in all sorts of ways. What did you mean by that?
Well, in my relationship, it wasn't a significant other, it was my roommate, and he got me back into drugs. So I was, using marijuana and all sorts of types of marijuana. And then eventually I got into cocaine, and then he would get angry. And the turning point in our relationship was when he had gotten a new dog, and he was changing the food so that the dog's food would be on his dog's same food, so he wouldn't have to buy two types of dog food. And when he changed the dog's food, it was having diarrhea all over the house. And when I decided to leave was when he threw the dog against the wall and then down the stairs. And I knew that I had to leave, or else I was going to be next, because he had very sudden anger outbursts. He was never violent towards me, but there was going to become a time where it would change and it would escalate. And so I packed up all my stuff the next day and I left. And
Yeah, that I
And it wasn't until after that where I learned that was a domestic violence relationship, even though he wasn't my significant other, and he would always put me down, and, he would make me second guess myself. And I always thought, I'm not being me. And that's when I made the decision to leave Owatonna and move 45 minutes away and start a new chapter of my life. So I closed the book on that and I started a new chapter in my life. And I stopped using drugs and I got my own place and I flourished.
It's interesting because it sounded like, just from listening to what you were saying, to some extent, you were living in a bit of terror even before you knew you were living in a bit of terror. And there may have been some sort of like coercive or manipulative behaviors that you were internalizing and sort of thinking like, what's wrong with me? But it was really like he was pushing those buttons deliberately.
Yes. Yes, he took advantage of my weaknesses.
And so you think going through that experience really, it sounds like it created a dramatic change in your life. What, and I know it was the incident with the dog, but like, what was it in you, in looking back, that got you to walk away from that situation?
I did not want to be living where I had to step on eggshells and, worry about, what he would eventually do to me, or like he would, I didn't want to live in a constant state of fear. And I knew that I deserved more and I could get out. And so I packed up my stuff and I lived in my car for a while, and then I bounced around between my mom's house and my dad's house and eventually found a place, and I packed up again and I left.
Mm. So at that point, like when that had happened, you were already aware of some of the problems in Sabrina's relationship?
It wasn't until after I moved
Okay.
that Sabrina had really opened up to me that I'm not sure who it was or which ex it was, but that she was being abused. I know she was choked at one time, and that's when I told her, like, you need to leave, but I knew, it's not that easy.
Yeah. What do you think caused her to open up to you? I'm just wondering whether, I was wondering, and it might be something completely different. I wonder whether you shared your story and that led her to open up, or just that you guys reconnected after you started. I mean, it could be any reason, but why do you think she picked you among the people to share with? Because one of the things I was thinking about was the idea that I think, we focus a lot on like looking out for domestic abuse in our families, but there's so much shame that's associated with it that sometimes our parents or our brothers or our sisters are not the first ones that we go to, or we minimize it with them because we don't want the pressure. And sometimes it's our friends that we're more likely to share these things with first. And I was just curious, in looking back, do you have any idea why she shared with you?
I think we had just, we always talked, and I would say like, "Hey, how's it going?" And she would tell me like, "Nah, it's all right," or "It's not going good." And I'd be like, "Okay, well, what's wrong?" And she would tell me, and I don't think I was the only person she told, um, but she would tell me, and I think it's because we had such a long relationship, because we knew each other since I was 15 and she was a couple years older than me. But we still had that long relationship where I think she felt comfortable telling me.
Yeah. What was she like? How did you guys meet and what was she like? Do you remember what she was like growing up?
I can't remember how we met. I think it was through school, and it was one of my friends knew her, and then we just started hanging out, and we just clicked immediately, and I knew, and then I found out she lived in the same trailer court that I did, and she actually lived down the street from me. And so we would spend all of our time together, and we would get into so much trouble. And as she was my best friend in high school, and I told her everything, and she would tell me everything, and I practically lived at her house for 2 years.
Oh,
Sabrina
wow.
Sabrina was one of those people who would give you the shirt off her back. And on a couple of occasions, she did give me the shirt off her back.
Literally?
Yes, literally, she gave me her shirt off her back. Uh,
Wow.
she always saw the good in people and never judged a person based on their struggles, because she struggled as well and she knew of people's struggles. She loved hanging out with her friends, but one thing that she loved more than anything in her life was she loved her family. Family meant everything to her, especially her son, Daniel.
Yeah. Do you know how old he is now? He was, let's
He was
see,
born in 2016, I believe. So he's about 9,
26.
February
He's
of 20.
9 or 10 right now. Yeah, when I was reading about her, one reoccurring thing was how much she loved uh, Daniel. And, parents tend to, we hope, love their kids, but just love spending time with her. And some of the things that people said about her I thought was kind of interesting. They described her as like caring. They described her kind of like you did, seeing the best in people, always looking for an opportunity to see the best in people, being a friend who is really approachable that you could go to. But also they described her as like fun and open-minded and goofy. And what do you remember about her personality?
I remember her being very goofy. We would sit there on Snapchat and we just take stupid videos of each other. And like, I just got a Snapchat memory. It has one of the Snapchat memories. And it was a video of Sabrina jiggling her belly fat. And I cried. I remember those days. Um, she was so goofy, and we had so much fun together. Um, but yeah, goofy and I'd say headstrong. She was very strong and she stood up for herself, and she definitely knew what she wanted in life, but I don't think she knew how to get there.
Mm. What do you mean by that? Like, what kinds of things do you think she wanted in life?
I know she definitely wanted to be with someone who loved her and her son. And I know eventually she wanted to get married someday. I know she wanted to help people in some way.
Yeah,
Maybe she didn't know how she could.
right. It sounds like she did help people. Just from reading, she helped a lot of people, but she was looking at sort of like a vocation and a life of it, it sounds like. The one of the things that I was just kind of wondering about, um, so you guys grew up together, and I know her boyfriend, he was significantly older. Did you ever meet him, or do you know how she met him?
I don't know how she met him, but I met him a couple times. I never really liked him. We never talked, and I just remember meeting him on just because he was there and he was friends with friends that Sabrina had friends with, just common friends. But I also know him because he actually dated my sister when he was a teenager. And so
Mm.
it was a weird overlap, and I knew their relationship did not end on great terms. So I never really liked him since the moment that I
So
saw
you
him.
sort of Yeah, so you came out of the gate. He came out of the gate knowing you, probably like viewed you as a threat because you knew his history. and you didn't necessarily trust him. What was his relationship with your sister like?
I'm not exactly sure. I was very little. I was probably maybe 2 or 3 at the time. So he probably
Mm-hmm.
doesn't even know that who I was. Because we never introduced each other. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but
How old was your sister at the time?
she was a teenager. She had just had
Okay.
she was 16 and she had just had her son. And
Mm-hmm.
at the time, they didn't know who the father was, and he was one of the candidates who they thought was, but thankfully he ended up not being the father. So I'm not sure how the relationship was because I was so little, but I do know it was violent.
No, yeah. How did your sister end up getting out of that relationship?
I'm not exactly sure. It had to have been through my mom. My mom was very protective of all her children. My mom is mama bear. She loves
Mm.
all her children. No matter what you do, she would always stand by you. My mom
That's why
helped.
moms are great.
Yes. My mom helped my siblings a lot after they would get out of relationships. She would be the buffer and she'd kind of mold them back to themselves and they'd move out and, get their own place again. And so it had to have
That's
been my
fine.
mom that helped her through that.
Yeah.
But I guess I never, so I'm not sure.
Sure of the way. So you already came in wary and kind of knew who he was, and it sounds like he was a bit standoffish with you guys. How did you know she was planning on? Because my understanding of it, and tell me if I have this wrong, is that we often hear about like the idea that on average it takes people 7 times to leave you know, a violent or even just an abusive, even if it's not physical violent, but um, a domestic abuse situation. Um, and it takes a lot of courage, and I think sometimes we don't think about how complex it is, and things like people uprooting their lives, or even just the idea that like I think very often in these relationships people around you pick up the fact that there's something wrong with the person while you're still sort of under the cloud of their charm or whatever good side they have or whatever it is, and it can be really hard to sort of like admit and share with people that, or even just give up on your investment in it. But my understanding was that she had gotten to the point where she was walking away. Do you know how she got to that point?
We haven't talked in a couple years before everything happened. So I'm not sure how it happened, but I remember they would break up and they'd get back together and they were very flip-floppy. They would be apart and then they'd be together. But from what I know is he wanted closure. He wanted to talk to her because he had thought that he was going to prison for some drug offense and they had met up so that he could say goodbye to her or whatever. But I'm not sure how she got to that point or why she went there.
Yeah. One of the things I know that the experts say is that, it takes people a long time to walk away, but there's no more dangerous point in a relationship. And I'm even thinking about the moment where you just picked up all your stuff and left with your roommate, but that there's no more dangerous point than when you try to leave someone. And someone was telling me, an abuse survivor was telling me not too long ago that if she had it over again, she would have never warned her partner that she was leaving because it just made it more risky. And, you know, and I wonder, when I listened to that story, did he have like a plan to to harm her there? Or was it one of those things where she said the wrong thing, or he gave her one chance to get back to her and do it? But I think sometimes we don't think enough about the dangers of even walking away. And I'm just thinking about this from a friend's perspective. Like, I know my entire life, or much of my life, my gut reaction when my friends have been in domestic violence situations or coercive situations has been, to say just leave. But over time, I've realized that, like, maybe just leave is the wrong answer and just listen is my job in those moments. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely feel that too, because I feel like it's everybody's reaction to say, well, you just need to leave. And like you said, that is the most dangerous time. What I would say is listen to the person, help them, ask them, what they need. Is there anything that I can do to help you survive this situation?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And it's sort of that idea, like, that Gabby Petito's parents have brought up over and over again, and brought up when we were in Minneapolis together, which is like, you have to remember, be careful about making an ultimatum to a person who's probably constantly hearing threats and ultimatums. And that maybe model a different kind of maybe love for them that creates even a greater contrast between, what they have in their relationship and you. Do you remember how you first heard about what happened to her?
Yes. I was at the bar with some coworkers after work with my boyfriend at the time. And I was just scrolling through Facebook and I saw a bunch of these posts saying, Sabrina, you'll be missed. And I was like, what is going on? And I took a look at her profile and it was tons of messages saying, we will miss you and like RIP or rest in peace. And I was so confused. And then I had looked it up online and I had found an article that was posted about what happened. And I just told my boyfriend, I said, we have to leave. I said, I have to leave. And so we left and I told him in the car. And I didn't cry at first because I think I was still processing it. And I was shocked. I could not believe what had happened. And we haven't talked at that point. We haven't talked in a long time. And we always made plans like, oh, you should come over. And I was like, oh yeah, you should come over and like see my new place and everything. But we never made those plans. And I really regret it.
Yeah. One of the most chilling things for me in reading about, well, one chilling thing was that, like, you have this very warm, nice person who, it sounds like, felt sorry for him and was giving him this opportunity before he went to jail for some kind of closure and some kind of goodbyes. But one of the other really chilling things was reading about how, well, one, reading about the defense's arguments, but that her friends, she had accepted a request from a friend or friends on the Life 360 app, which allowed them to track her location. And that's how the friends, I think, ultimately are the ones who found her body after she was underneath the overpass or by the railroad tracks for that long. And and I mean, to me, that in itself is it's just sad to think that friends were in that situation and they knew who she was supposed to meet and all those other things, just kind of imagining that piece of it. But also, I think some of the audacity of the defense, right, in the case, and I'm sure you've been following the case, that, they argued things like she had accidentally shot herself in the head and other things like that. And I'm just curious, and they've tried to dismiss it. What has it been like to follow the case? Do you even follow the case?
Yes, I've been following it. I see updates from Sabrina's mom, Stacia, on her TikTok, and she posted on the Sabrina Lee Foundation page. And then occasionally I'll look up his name and Owatonna, Minnesota, just to see if there are any new articles. And yeah, the defense is really pushing to get a lot of stuff dropped, and it's disheartening. It breaks you a little bit each time because, and I know you're supposed to say presumed innocent until proven guilty, and I believe he will have his fair share day in court. And I cannot wait until that day.
Yeah, and I know in the case there are a number of things, like he was carrying case, he had the gun, and it contained the gun. It almost seems like it was planned. Uh, Is that the feeling that you all or you have?
I'm not sure yet because we don't have all the information, but to some extent, he knew what he was going to do, I think, yeah. I just don't think that he knew about her on the Life 360 app. He didn't plan for that, which thankfully made her get found very soon after it happened. And then her telling people who she was meeting helped a lot because they knew exactly who to search for first.
Yeah, and then another piece of it that stuck out to me, again, lots of chilling things here, is, they had them on surveillance camera from the convenience store walking over to the area near the tracks, and the case, he's carrying the case as he goes. But one of the other details that they had was that in some of the court documents is that after she was shot and presumably he hid the body, he returned to the scene to retrieve a pack of cigarettes. And to me, that's just unbelievably cold. And I think of like all these situations where people are in relationships with abusive people, and they'll say things to me like, but this person's a horrible human being, X, Y, or Z, they're abusive, but he does love me, or there are good things about me. And I just, or that person. And I just think, like, how could the kind of person who, regardless of how you ended up dead, they didn't call law enforcement, but they did come back for a pack of cigarettes. Like, how cold that is.
Yeah, I remember reading about that, and I was furious. And the defense are trying to say that that he didn't want to get blamed for it, and that's his defense, is that he didn't call 911 because he didn't want to get blamed for it, which just frustrates me even more because it's so ridiculous.
Right. Because I can definitely tell you one way you will get blamed for it. People see you with the person, and that happens. We were talking about how, like, we probably both learned a lot about domestic violence in recent years, and it sounds like it's probably been helped both of us, probably sounds like, be better friends from people. But from your situation and Sabrina's situation, is there, what do you feel like you've learned, or what new advice, now that you've walked through this, what do you think you've learned from the experience that might be helpful for people?
I learned that everyone deals with trauma differently. And some people need that closure to end a chapter of their life. Um, and some people like to still see the good in that person. And that, like I said earlier, domestic violence is different in every case. It's not always physical, but it can be emotional and financial. And I learned that no matter what you do, there is always people that are going to be there that want to help you and that are there for you.
Yeah. And I think one of the hard things too about, you know, domestic violence or domestic abuse is a lot of that is fueled by convincing the person that there is no one for them, that no one really cares about them. And I wonder whether like some of getting away is connected to being able to see your own value and your own worth. And that when you can do that, even if it's because you're seeing it through a reflection coming out of other people, that being able to see your worth and that you deserve something better might help. Because I'm thinking about that moment where you left too. Like something must have clicked in you that said, I don't deserve to live like this.
Yeah. I think, the abusers always try to isolate the person so that it's harder to reach out to that person and show them that nobody cares about you. And it's hard, but I think everyone needs to know that there is someone that cares about you, whether it's your friends or your family. There's always going to be someone that's going to want to help you.
Yeah. I I think too, sometimes, people will go through potentially abusive relationships or clearly violent relationships or coercive ones, and they have no idea of sort of like the signs of what might cause it to become deadly. And, one of the things that I was just reading about, and some of the materials that Jim Schmidt sent over were talking about choking, and that once someone chokes you, as one example, the likelihood of your death or them later murdering you or something or seriously harming you increases exponentially. And I wonder whether it just makes me think whether maybe we're not putting enough effort into awareness and making people aware of the signs. I don't know about you, but for me, I don't remember ever hearing any of these things when I was growing up or in school or in a class or something along the lines. Do you think there's something around awareness that we need to do?
I think because everybody's perspective is, you know, they don't know what goes on behind closed doors. And some people are ashamed or embarrassed about what is going on, and they want to portray that perfect life that they have, especially nowadays with social media. I think social media plays a big part. And I hope that there's more awareness because, I mean, I didn't realize until after I had left that you could call what my story was a domestic violence related.
Right, right. I like it's such a cliche, but this actually comes back to my friend who was involved in the domestic violence incident that, that reared its head in Minneapolis. But I remember months before she had posted this thing about how it was, because she was going through some other issues in life, that it's okay to not be okay. And I remember after we talked about it and she told me about it, and I that was kind of in the back of my mind, like, just to let her know it's okay to not be okay, and for me to not freak out about what she's doing and meet her where she's at with advice. But like the biggest thing in my mind was like, just let her know it's okay to not be okay, even if I'm not saying those words, so she would feel comfortable sharing anything. I wonder how important maybe is that to creating a safe space for someone, and how do you think we can do that? How do you think we can create safe spaces for people, non-judgmental spaces for people in those moments?
I think the biggest part is to just know that you're there for them. If what they need is to talk it out or to tell you what they need, but to just be there for somebody emotionally, so that they have the confidence to address what's going on. But yeah, creating a safe space with your friend or another member of your family, and just, yeah, letting them know that you're there for them if they need help.
Yeah. And I think like the temptation is to tell people like, oh, you deserve better, but which is a fine thing to say, or this makes no sense, or some version of that. But like none of that helps. Like they already know it doesn't make sense. They already they already know. And that, if you are going to say something like that, use it to reinforce what they're already starting to share with you, as opposed to just sort of like inserting it thinking that that's going to convince the person, because to some extent I think they probably already know. And I think one of the hard parts is our own emotions in that moment, because like like when I heard that story, I was ready to like get in my car. I would have jumped on a plane if I had to, and I wanted to go take out the guy in that situation. And I've felt that same feeling before. But I have to remember that like my own anger, my own frustration about the situation that they're in should not drive my response, if that makes sense.
Yes, yeah, to keep a level head. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That it's a good way. And so I'm curious from your perspective, like in thinking about just Sabrina's case, and its resolution, because I know it's still winding its way from the courts. What are you hoping for there?
Well, I mean, we're all hoping for justice. Um, and I'm hoping that Sabrina's story will be a sort of precedent case to stop letting the abusers off with plea deals or letting them off because they have information. Because he has been through the court system many times and he's always gotten off with a plea deal because he's had some information that the law enforcement wanted. And he got off from some serious crimes just by giving them a little sliver of information that they needed to put somebody else away. So I think we need to take victims and survivors seriously and to have a more punishable system, I guess. I don't know if punishable is
Yeah,
the right word.
I know what you mean, because like we have this weird hierarchy of crimes. And I work with a lot of over the years, like as a reporter or in different aspects of my life and my mental health work and other stuff like that. I've worked with a lot of people who investigators, CPS workers, other people like that. And it's interesting in talking to them and seeing the difference, because I've had more than, I think of like a client in particular. And I remember someone saying to me, and he had only been charged with like an assault at his school, where he had taken a keyboard and hit another kid in the back of the head with it so hard that keys came out of the keyboard and were stuck in that kid's head. And I remember someone saying to me, he is going to kill someone. Okay. So skip ahead. Several years later, his family comes back to me. I hadn't been seeing him for a while. And they come back and they're like, will you see him again? It's getting really bad. And I started seeing him again one day. There's also a kid who brought a gun to my office, and I could see it in his sweatpants. And I was like, could you please move your leg and not point the gun at me? But the next I heard of him, he had been involved in some kind of drug deal, nice suburban neighborhood, walked through the woods, went to the house of whatever this kid was, a fellow high school student he had an issue with. His 13-year-old sister came down to the door. He asked for the guy. She said he wasn't home. And then the girl walked back up the stairs, closed the door, and this guy fired shots into the house, nearly hitting her on the stairwell. And I just think of myself, like, I often think, rolling back to that moment where someone said to me, this guy is going to kill someone. He's luckily in prison right now, but this guy is going to kill someone. Like, I'm just wondering whether, and when I heard it, I believed it. Like, when the person said to me, I was like, this makes complete sense. But there aren't enough mechanisms in our system, or we're not using those mechanisms to get ahead of some of these instances of violence. And I just thought of that as you were talking about Sabrina's boyfriends or ex-boyfriends history, because it's not like he wasn't known to be violent and he wasn't known to do domestic violence. Are we not taking those warnings seriously enough? Or what do you think's happening there?
I definitely think that's the case, that we're just not taking it seriously enough. When someone has multiple domestic violence relationships and drug abuse is in the picture, I think those are strong motivators to escalate more. And I think that law enforcement and the court system needs to figure out some way to not let them just go free. I mean, obviously,
Right.
jail time hasn't served him any good. So
But there are a bunch of things we could do, right? Like, it's not just jail time, but like also making it really hard for people like that to get guns, for example, or, like, I don't know, mandatory mental health treatment, supervision after release, that some intense supervision. There are all sorts of things that we could do. I mean, like, there's no way for us to start locking up people on no crime just because, we're not going to do the Minority Report like that Tom Cruise movie. But there are all these levers we can pull, in addition to giving victims resources to get out, and shelters and other things like that. We can work both ends of it, right? Like, pressure on the offender and also lifelines to the victims.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. It's you never want good to come out of have to come out of a tragedy like this. Like, I wish we were in a world where we could work our way to good without something bad having happened, but often really horrible things provide opportunities for something good to happen. What do you hope comes out of this loss?
Well, I hope that more victims will be able to get out of their situations and put more of a spotlight on the abusers so they won't be able to hide in plain sight. And I hope it gives a chance for those to speak for those who can't speak for themselves.
Yeah.
And the Sabrina Lee Foundation is doing a great job. They host free self-defense classes, and they have tons of resources to advocate for victims.
One of the things that I wonder about, like, I'm not sure if you've ever heard this one, like if men needed tampons, they'd be on vending machines on every corner. But I wonder whether like there's an element to this and the awareness that has to do with the fact that women are the most likely victims, or LGBTQ people are likely to be victims. Like, and I'm thinking of this in the context of like, there have been a lot of conversations recently, following the election, and even Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook and other people talking about the importance of masculinity and other things like that. And I just wonder, like, in all this noise, that part of the reason why we don't give this the attention that we would give it. Like, if this were happening to men, particularly white men, every day at this rate across the country, I have a feeling it would be a 5-alarm national fire. We'd be like doing a moonshot, like trying to cure cancer type funding to fix it. And I'm wondering whether you think that there's some element of this that involves us not taking the safety of women as seriously and almost treating it as if sort of like it's a cross to bear.
Yeah, I think men have that confidence in them that they can fool anyone and they can put on two faces. Um and yes, domestic violence happens to everyone, whether race, gender, or class, but most victims are women. And yeah, I believe that men do get away with a lot of it because the women may be too scared to speak up, or they're not strong enough to fight off their attacker.
I want to ask you, like, as a man, what do you think our responsibility as other men are when it comes to this? Particularly those of us who, actually, for all men, what do you think our responsibility is?
What do you mean by that?
I mean, like, as a man who is against domestic violence, wants to support my friends who are suffering through it, like, what do you think my responsibility is? To raise my voice, to be there for support? Like, do you think that because there is this sense of power differential and fear, do you think there's value to men raising their voice about these issues loudly?
Yeah, I believe that. Like, if more men spoke up, maybe more people would listen, which is sad because women should be able to speak up and be believed and be able to speak up. But yeah, I believe, just being there for support and helping that person, that'd be the most responsible choice.
Yeah. All of this it's really got the wheels in my brain going and thinking, and I really feel for the loved ones of Sabrina and people who are like her, and for her. But I feel like you've made a lot of really insightful points about how we can be there for people in non-judgmental ways, how we can support them, how we can educate people and help them become more aware. And so I was wondering just if you have any closing thoughts in terms of a message that you would like people to hear when it comes to helping people who are struggling like the situations you went through and that Sabrina went through.
I would tell them that they are not alone. There is people who love them, whether it be family or friends, and that if you know someone is going through any domestic violence, that there's help and there's people that care about you, and it's time for survivors to step up and speak out about domestic violence. And from the Sabrina Lee Foundation, it's break the silence and end the violence.
I love it. I really do. I like that message because, there's this saying, I don't know if you've ever heard this one, but you mentioned dealing with drug addiction. I'm in recovery myself, but the saying that's always stuck with me, we're only as sick as our secrets. And, the underlying idea is that for an alcoholic or a drug addict, once you start keeping secrets, that's the gateway to keep more secrets, like your potential drug use that's coming right on the corner. And maybe part of this is taking this out of the shadows and us having open conversations like this about it. So, Teri Lyn, thank you for being willing to be so open and so vulnerable and have this conversation. I appreciate it. I mean, this is a part of your story in your life and Sabrina's story in her life, and you don't owe it to anyone, but I appreciate you for sharing it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I always take the opportunity to speak out against domestic violence and speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves.
If you'd like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, and to support the podcast, you can join us at our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook.